In this video, we are going to talk about polynomial and rational inequalities. So our question here says, highlight the sections of the graph that meet the following inequalities. State the regions of the graph that meet the criteria. So an inequality is like an equation, but instead of having an equal sign, it has either a greater than, a less than, a greater than or equal to, or a less than or equal to. So we're going to take a look at our first graph. We have f of x. This means greater than or equal to 0. So f of x really is just y. So we're trying to look at where y is either bigger or equal to 0. So anytime I'm doing one of these questions, I suggest starting with the equal part. So I'm going to look, where are the y values equal to 0? So on the y-axis, 0 would be here. So that would be our x-axis. So it would have a y value of 0 at basically my x-intercepts. So since it is supposed to be greater than or equal to 0, for the equal to, I am going to put a dot on each of those x-intercepts where it equals 0. All right, then I need to think about the greater than. So greater than means bigger. So we want our y values to be bigger than 0. So numbers that are bigger than 0 would be our positive numbers. So we're basically looking at where our y values are positive. So my y values would be positive in this section here. So I'm just going to scribble or highlight over top of it. It is also bigger than 0 in this section over here, right, where all of those y values are positive. Didn't show up very well, so I'm going to just go over that with my highlighter. Okay, so it equals 0 at each of my x-intercepts, and it is bigger than 0 in those sections that I highlighted. So I do need to state those regions. We can do it as an inequality, or we can do it using interval notation. If I try to use interval notation, I'm going to start with this first section here. It's between -6 on the x-axis and -4 on the x-axis. So when we do interval notation, we write it like a point. So I would do -6 comma -4. And then the brackets tell us whether it has the equal sign or not. So if it was just greater than, oops, I knocked something over, and not equal to, then I would use a rounded bracket. But since it has the equal to, I actually use a square bracket to say that we're also including the points at 6 and -4. Okay, I also have this region here, which starts at 1, and then it looks like it goes until 2, but if I zoomed out, I would see that it does actually continue all the way to infinity. So the next section is between 1 and infinity. And if I take a look, we are including the point at 1, so I'm going to put a square bracket on that. Infinity is not an actual number, so we only ever really do a round bracket on that. You will notice there is one more point that didn't have a region, it was just a single point. So this one looks weird when I write it. This is at -1. So I'm going to say this region is from -1 to -1. And then we are equaling, so we're going to put a square bracket on that. And then we put our union symbols in between to say that is the union, right, of all three of those sections. All right, we're going to take a look at one more. This one here, different graph, says f of x is less than or equal to 0. So first thing I like to do is start with the equal part. It equals 0. So I'm looking to see where the y value equals 0, which it does right here at our x-intercept, so I make a filled in dot. And then this time, this is a less than sign, so we're looking for where y is less than 0 or where y would be negative. So I'm looking for sections where the y values of the points are negative. So that would be this section here. So I'm going to shade over that or highlight. And then this section here also has y values that are negative numbers. So I have two sections. The first section is this one here. It goes from negative infinity to the asymptote here at 1. I never put a square bracket. We never have an equal sign on infinity, so I do a rounded bracket. And then 1 is an asymptote, so we also don't equal 1 at the asymptote. The next section here starts at 3 and goes until the asymptote at 5. So this is between 3 and 5. I do have a point at 3, so I do a square bracket. And I have an asymptote at 5, so I do a rounded bracket because we don't actually have a point at 5. And then we put our little union symbol in to say that it's those two sections put together. All right, we've got two more. This one says f of x is greater than 5. So we're not looking for greater than or equal to 0 this time. We're looking for greater than 5. So f of x is just y. So I'm going to look to see where my y value is 5, which is right here. And I'm going to find the points where it equals 5. So it would have a y value of 5 here. It would have a y value of 5 here. We don't actually want it to be equal to. We just want it to be greater than. So instead of putting a filled in dot, we are going to put a little empty circle to show it goes up to that point, but it does not include that point. And then we're looking for things bigger than 5. So the y value is bigger than 5, which would be this section here and this section here. All right, that section, the first one here, goes from -4 to the asymptote at -2. So it's between the x values of -4 and -2. We are not including the point at -4 because it didn't have the equal sign, so I'm going to do a rounded bracket. And then -2 is the asymptote, so same thing, we just do a rounded bracket. All right, this section starts at my other asymptote at 2 and then continues until 4. Asymptote, we don't have points there, so that's just a rounded bracket. It doesn't have an equal. And then at 4, we have an empty circle, so we're going to do a rounded bracket as well. And then we're just going to unite those two sections. All right, our last one here, we have f of x is less than 2. So I'm going to start by figuring out where my y values are at 2. And I see I have a point here. It doesn't have the equal sign on it, so I'm going to do an empty circle. And then we're doing less than. So we're looking for all the y values that are smaller than 2, which would be this section here. So this section on my x values starts at the asymptote, which I believe is at 3, and ends at 7. So it goes from 3 to 7. 3 is an asymptote, so we don't do an equal sign, we do a rounded bracket. And then 7, we've got that empty circle because it didn't have the equal sign on the inequality, so I also do a rounded bracket. And that is the only section. All right, I will see you in the next video to do the next question.